folks. I'm joined tonight by Marie. Marie, how are you keeping?
Good, all good. Ready to talk some mixed?
Yes, indeed. So our topic tonight is going to be, based on the mixed team. I suppose with so many competitions, we've got senior, intermediate, junior. We've had the social mixed league. We've got the interprovincials coming up. There's an awful lot of questions about, how is a mixed team set up? What is the golden answer to setting up the mixed team? What's the recipe for success? So, we're just going to have a bit of a chat tonight, just, on that, and maybe dispel some of the myths that's out there, or maybe give, I won't say advice, because, there's probably no wrong way of doing it, but it's like we're going to give our opinions on how things are done. So, Marie, well, first of all, I've probably given the answer away, but, is there a golden rule for setting up a mixed team? How you do it?
No, I don't think so. And I think that's one of the main reasons why we need to have this conversation. It's come up a good few times, and we're asking people what topics that they want covered. And the mixed one, particularly for a new team setting up, people do think, is there a golden rule? And if you watched last year's All-Ireland, the year before All-Ireland, Darryl, both your teams, no team is setting up the same way. It really just comes down to the team you have, the skills you have, and the men and women that you have available, I suppose. So no golden rule. So not to get people to turn off straight away, waiting for the cliffhanger of the secret. But I think there's lots to talk about. There's definitely a discussion, and it's good to get a male's perspective and a female's perspective on it.
Yeah. So, and for anyone watching, kind of the way we're going to approach this is more if your club has maybe a men's team and a ladies team, because I think if you only have a mixed team, you don't really have the same kind of questions in that, you've got two people for every position, of both genders, and you're trying to fit them all into one team, because, you might just have the one team and it's kind of whoever you have. So we're going to be looking at those scenarios, just to try and determine, okay, well, we've got 12 guys, we've got 12 girls, and we've only got 9 spaces on the team, what way are we going to do it? But I suppose probably the first place to start on it, Marie, is, how do you pick which players are going to be on it before we even look at positions, or do you look at positions, how do you know, okay, well, we'll take the first 4, the first 5 ladies, and then the next 4 or next 5 fellas, what way would you do it?
Yeah, I think it's, again, obviously it's down to each team, but I think a big mistake lots of teams make is they just take their 5 best men and 4 best women and kind of make a Frankenstein team, just like a complete split between the two, without thinking of how those individual players fit into a mixed team. I'm firmly of the belief that it's not just the top 5 and the top 4, or the top 4 and top 5. It has to be a team that kind of gels together a little bit more. The mixed team, slightly different than, just the men's or just the women's, because you don't train together, you don't play together that much. You need players that are very adaptable and know the game inside out, probably more so than even in the standalone men, standalone women. So I think it's kind of chicken or the egg. Do you pick your better players, or do you pick your positions first? I think lots of teams, and just for anyone who doesn't know, the minimum amount of women that you have is 4, and the maximum amount of men that you have is 5, or vice versa. So I think lots of people start with the women, and I know we do on our side. You kind of think what positions the women fit into and what position your top men fit into. And I know it's kind of around the houses way of saying it, but it's, you have a extremely good bowler on the men's team, extremely good bowler on the women's team, and you kind of have to decide which one is going to fit into your dream mixed team. So I think lots of teams, as a standard, and I know there's outliers for all of them, will generally have a female catcher, if at all possible, to kind of give the outfield spaces to the men, who would generally tend to be a bit faster, cover more ground, and then bring the women more in on the bases and in the infield play. And that's just a kind of a standard that you see across the board. Now, definitely outliers to that. I know we've played women outfield. Depends if you have one of the best outfielders in the country, you're going to play them outfield. It really just depends on who you have at your disposal. But as a general rule of thumb, I think most teams will set up with the ladies on the bases and a catcher, and then the men as your outfield and bowler. Would you find the same, Darryl, at your side?
Well, I think it really depends on the skill set that you've got in your team, and kind of for us, a lot of it will come down to who's willing to play in the mix as well, because you get some players, and it's an awful lot of commitment. Playing on one senior team, you might have 8 or 9 matches in the year. Never mind doubling that if you're then playing in the mixed as well. And we've had some players that are like, okay, well, I'm used to playing in my position, but and say it's first base, for example, and you've got a really good guy and a really good girl on first base, and they're like, okay, well, I want to play, but I'm not going to be playing on my position in first base. And they're like, oh, well, we'll put you at shortstop. But that same player might not be comfortable playing a shortstop position because, the ball coming at you is very different. Maybe some people feel a bit more vulnerable, and either on the male or the female side, that a lot of it comes down to that. And, like the commitment will be a huge one. Like for us, we kind of usually look at, okay, who's going to be playing for the year and kind of work backwards from there. But in general, we would probably go with a guy at bowler. Not to say that is the right answer, but it's like the way it's worked out with our club is, we've kind of been a bit blessed with male bowlers over the years, that we have a bit of like depth even in that position, that we could probably play any one of about 4 or 5 guys and to be well fit to do it. And same, we've had usually very good male outfielders. So like we kind of alternate between maybe 2 fellas in the outfield, maybe 3. But again, it depends game on game. Like I know. You referenced some of the finals. Like the 2020 final, we started off with 2 guys in the outfield, 1 girl. Game wasn't quite working for us. We jigged it around. We ended up finishing the game with 3 fellas in the outfield. Now, one of the guys that went into the outfield, I don't think he touched the ball, but it's just the way it worked out. And one of the girls had an absolute stormer when she came in on third base. But like I was actually going to ask you that question. So you mentioned you could have really good girls in the outfield on your team. Would you then look at, okay, well, they're really good, they're my best player, therefore I'm going to play them on the base just because they're the best player on your ladies team?
We touched on it a little bit when we did the kind of the mistakes that people make. Like you can be an incredible outfielder and it might not necessarily transfer to being a base player because it's a slightly different skill set. You have to be, I played outfield, and when you come in to play on a base, you're suddenly gone from having acres of space to having to be tied to like this little box in the corner. So it just depends on if your player is adaptable. You do find that the better men's outfielders will take precedence over better female outfielders. Just happens the hits are harder, their hits are longer. So the women in the game tend to have to concede their position more than the men, I find, from our club anyway. And even like from the clubs that we've played, the female outfielders or the female base players generally tend to move positions in the mixed more than the men's. Again, depends on the team. So it's not necessarily you can be an absolute stormer outfield, and if you can't transfer that into a base player, then even if you might be technically a more all-rounder, better player, you might not fit into that mixed team. And I think that's what's really important for people to remember, that to not build that Frankenstein team, that you have like 9 individual players that aren't in their best position. And like you see it in all codes. Just because you're a brilliant goalie doesn't mean you can be thrown in full forward. So I think it's the same thing for the mixed team. And it's a mistake that I think every new mixed team makes. They just pick their top players and that's it, and try and find a way to work that. If you have ladies who play outfield and that they can work in on a base, I think that's probably a really, really good start for the mixed team, because the infield play in the mix is faster and it's like harder hits and they're lower ground balls. And if you have like the ladies who are willing to kind of throw themselves on that, it's a great head start. And I think it's a big jump. If you're playing on a base in the ladies game alone, it's a big jump to suddenly play in the mixed. You have a fella coming up to bat that's going to be able to hit harder down third base line. It is a totally different shot that you're trying to block. So I found that bringing in really good outfield players to play in on the base works well, but it just really depends on the skill set that you have.
Yeah, no, like, and I would fully agree. And that sometimes instead of, like the Frankenstein team, as you refer to it, all your best 5 of one and the best 4 of the other, that sometimes your best mixed team could potentially have, like on paper, none of your best players in the single code. Now, I know that like it's possibly unlikely for that to happen, but like you could quite easily have someone who's like, okay, well, they're really good for the mixed team, so we're gonna play them, as opposed to another person who you be maybe on the men's or the ladies, you're looking at them as the the stronger player that they don't actually get playing just because the dynamics of the team are quite different. And I know you mentioned earlier about, sometimes they don't train together. Some clubs, they do, others they don't. But I think over the last year we've seen, with the split seasons, like with the there's less mixed games. Now I know that's all been changed now, but there was nearly more opportunities for a men's or a ladies team probably to gel together as opposed to a mixed team. So communication comes into it massively. To link those two together.
Yeah, and I think it's about having people on the field that, again, know the game inside out. Like if you have, and I'll just talk about the ladies' game, obviously, but if you have like 8 ladies and that know the game really well and one that doesn't know it so well, they can absolutely compensate for that. But I don't think that's transferable in the mixed team because, again, you're not training together as a mixed group as such. There might be kind of blended training and different kind of sessions and stuff, but you're not, and the mixed season tended to be shorter. You need to have the game, know the game inside out. And that really kind of determines who you're picking for your mixed team and who you're putting there, because that communication and really understanding what's happening, and particularly as you move to the batting, it's something that is really hard to pick up on the day. It's like I don't think that we could take half of the two. So we have a ladies All-Ireland winning team in Adamstown. You have a men's All-Ireland winning team in Earn Eagles. And if we took your 5 best players and our 4 best women's players, I don't necessarily think that they're going to win an All-Ireland as a mixed team. So I think it's all about just finding people that work together and communicate well together. And I see it particularly with the shortstop and second base, and seeing it in my own club, when that relationship is really good in the mixed, it can be a really, really strong team because you're kind of controlling the game from shortstop and you're bringing your base players into it. And yeah, it's just all about that kind of cohesiveness as a team, which is kind of hard in the mixed team because, like you say, you're not used to playing together all the time.
Yeah, so like, to expand on that then, so I know you mentioned earlier that, you probably look at, your ladies and where they fit best. So in the way that you do that, would you kind of maybe pencil out, okay, well, I'm thinking of playing the ladies here, so I'm going to look at who's appropriate for it? Or are you looking at, maybe, I know we said not the 4 best players, but maybe, say your top 5 or 6 ladies and say, right, where do I fit them in? Which approach would you take on it?
I think as well, and we haven't really touched on it, but batting is so important in the mixed team. So if you think of, we judge players generally on their fielding, for right or for wrong. If someone is absolutely, brilliant outfield and they're mopping up balls at front and centre. Whereas when it comes to bringing ladies into your mixed team, it's really down to the strong batters. So even if you have people who are, one step ahead of each other on covering second base, for example, you would always go with the strongest batter because it's the hardest. You're, as a female batter going into the mixed team, you're 90% of the time batting against a really fast male bowler. So you have to have female batters that are kind of up to that task. And the fielding can be a little bit more compensated, whereas you're batting, you're standing there solo at home base. Whereas if I had the choice between someone who was slightly better at batting and slightly behind on the fielding, I'd always go with the batting strength.
Okay, interesting. So then, that'll bring us on to
you disagree,
Darren. Then. Well, no, it's just interesting to get that point of view, because obviously, in my own team, I used to, everyone's a fantastic batter and everyone's a fantastic fielder, so we never have those issues.
Of course.
But no, I mean, I suppose batting's probably something that people don't spend enough time on. Considering how much of the time that you're actually involved doing it. Whereas if you're fielding, you may or may not be involved in the game. Even if you're a brilliant player, or maybe you're that ninth player that you referred to that doesn't know the game as well, the way the game falls out, that person might not even be involved because they're like, well, we're just the team either are avoiding hitting there or they happen to not hit there. So whereas they're going to have to bat at some stage. So I
yeah, it's probably, and I just find that myself, it's more highlighted in the mixed game. and it's speed as well. So, you're looking for, the fastest ladies and the fastest men, because the mixed game tends to be a lot faster. The ladies' game has slightly different tactics. The men's game has slightly different tactics, but you kind of have this mismatch of players. And I just find that the tempo of the mix can be very, very quick. So when you're looking at like your preferable skills, I would like batting, speed, then fielding, and it will be kind of in that order. Because I do think, and it's up to the kind of sideline to watch the game and know who you're playing. If you're playing a team who are really good at placing a ball, and teams will look for your vulnerable player, because I don't think, the best teams in the world are always going to have the ninth best player. It doesn't matter, even if that ninth best player is better than any other player in the country. So teams get really good at picking out that vulnerable player. And unfortunately, for right or for wrong, teams do tend to target the women in a game. So if you have a really strong woman that's been targeted, it can really transform a mixed game for you, because people have made that assumption. They're going to go, okay, I'm going to go target, this like lady right outfield here, and it happens to be an absolutely brilliant fielder. They won't do it for very long. So it's kind of up to the sideline to try and pick out where the vulnerabilities are and have batters that are able to exploit those.
So that kind of brings us nicely onto the batting. So, obviously you've explained the traits you're looking for in your batters, to be able to pick out those, weaknesses, we'll call them, and, to be fast. But on the placement then of the batting order, is it much different, do you find, in the mixed? Are you looking at, say like changing it every one or two, or, to not have, three of one in a row, or what way would you look at it?
Yeah, and it's the tactics that we talked about in the mistakes video as well, and we mentioned it before, that your strongest female batter in your female game would generally kind of be weighted towards the middle, maybe third or fourth, and it might just happen that they're going to go first in the mixed game. And the batting order, it's really about who's coming next, I find. So if you have like a really strong batter, whether it's a male or female, and they're pretty speedy, you need to have some speedy people in front of them. And I think it's just about, again, down to the team that you have. I feel like we're not really given much helpful advice when you're just saying it's down to the team that you have. But it's about making sure that every person can maximize their time at the home base. So if you are coming up and you have a really big hitter, then make sure that the people in front of them in your batting order are able to get around the bases at speed. Similarly, if you have a weaker batter coming, make sure that you have someone that's gone just ahead of them that's going to be quick enough to give them some breathing space. I find that helps a lot. So if you have someone who's really just focused on getting to first base, the person before them should be like a nice nifty runner that's able to nip on to second and take the pressure off that person getting to first base. And that then obviously translates the whole way around. So yeah, it's just about looking at the strengths and weaknesses. Don't limit like your really big batters by someone that's maybe going to get out in front of them, or not be able to move at the pace that they want to move around. And you're coming at it from the men's perspective, so how do you find that when you're setting up your batting order?
Well, like say, like when I'd be doing it, I can't say I wouldn't be looking at who's one of the men and who's one of the ladies, because you obviously have to, but in a way that I actually wouldn't, because I'm still looking at, kind of similar to yourself, and look, right, who's going to get on base, who's able to do this, and what traits do they bring in? Are they someone that usually skies the ball up in the air? Okay, well, if they are, and they're more likely to get out, well, maybe I want to ensure that there's somebody who's definitely going to get on base before them, so that at least, if they do pop it up in the air and get out, that they've advanced the runner. Whereas you don't want to have that person maybe as your first batter, because, well, if they step up and bat it up in the air and get caught out, it's kind of, you're out for nothing. So kind of looking at it in that sense. But on our team, I suppose the majority of the bigger hitters might be the guys. There's one or two of the ladies that are able to hit, definitely hit as far as some of the guys, and we're kind of blessed in that sense. But I would always be looking at, maybe every second batter, every third batter, having somebody, if possible, with that ability to be able to drive the ball into the outfield. so that, if you're in a situation with bases loaded, that that you're able to capitalize on that, as opposed to saying, right, okay, well, we've got 3 big batters and we're going to load them one after another, because if one person steps up and doesn't do it, at least I've got the next one and then the next one. But again, I suppose that kind of comes down to what resources you have, what personnel you have in your team, that if you're able to do that. But I suppose as a general rule, and I know we're not giving answers on this because there is no real answer, but I would tend not to have 3 guys or 3 girls in a row. I think 2 is probably okay, but it mixes it up, and like not for any other reason, well, they're a worse batter, they're a better batter, but it changes that. You mentioned it's a different game than the men's or the ladies for your team, but it's also different for the opposition team. So if there's a bowler, male or female, and they kind of get a run of one or the other, they might kind of get used to kind of the dynamic that it's going in. Whereas if it's changing, you're playing against a girl, they're used to a ball coming in from 11 meters. So like their reaction time, even though the ball might not be as fast, sometimes it is. You've got exceptions out there. Like I think probably one of the best examples of speed at the minute is probably Emma Reddy from Glenbarntown. Like massive speed. So like a ball coming from her from 11 meters is, your reaction time is probably a lot less than say some other people from 12. So when you've got players that are dealing with that, even though the ball is coming in faster, because they've got more time to react to it, there is that different dynamic. So doing it that you're mixing it up, male, female, or whatever, it keeps the opposition guessing the whole time as well.
Yeah, if you're talking about training, then we're talking about trying to not have that Frankenstein team and have them used to kind of playing together. And I know in clubs, the men's and the women's do tend to train together, pre-COVID anyway, that was lots of overlap. So how do you think you can best approach trying to get a mixed team, to gel that way? I find it can be difficult because you're playing in a certain position in the ladies and then you're switching a position into the mixed, and to try and get that cohesiveness as a team. Have you any advice for anyone that's trying to go down that road and get the mixed team a little bit more gelled?
But to get it gelled, probably the best bit of advice I can give, and it's like it is Rounders related, but it's not, and it's kind of like what we did for our 2021 season. So we played Hugh Brierly, or Ted as everyone knows him. He was our captain. He was our shortstop for the season, and obviously he's a fantastic player, but not just that, he's such a likable fella, and everybody loves him. So having him there just has everyone at ease, and he's always talking. You've got that communication. He's that, and if you can put someone, and it doesn't have to be a guy, it could be a girl. If you've got that kind of communicator at that shortstop position, it's kind of your link between your outfield, your infield, your bowler, your catcher. So if you have someone that makes the team in general feel at ease in that position, as well as knowing the game, it makes the job of your team gelling together so much easier, I think.
So now we're going batting, speed, personality, and then fielding in order what we're looking for. No, I get what you mean though, because it can be daunting, and to come at it from the ladies' perspective, like it can be daunting if you're used to playing, in a team of 9. And trust me, I've played tougher ladies games than mixed games. But if you're getting up to bat, and then you have particularly players who play a male, or teams that play a male bowler and a male shortstop, and like, even if I can place the ball, all of a sudden the field feels very, very small. So it can be daunting. It can be a total shift in mentality. And lots of these games are on the same day. So you play your ladies game first, and then you go into a mixed game. And then even say from the male perspective, you're coming and you're like, okay, there's more space than maybe in the men's game. And how do I utilize that space? So I think it's, having someone there that's kind of keeping everyone calm and keeping everyone together it's an important one.
Yeah,
probably don't talk about it enough.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I know, we mentioned it in passing about communication in Rounders being so important, but I can't emphasize enough how important it is. And especially say in the situation where you've got this team and it's not quite gelling, again, it becomes even more vital, because you could have a well-oiled machine and people could they might not need to talk. Now, I'd still encourage everybody, a team should be talking non-stop. But like, if you're on a team where you are trying to gel together, that role becomes even more important. And, as I said, like for me, I just find that the shortstop position is good for that because, they're moving from left to right, they're in, they're out. Whereas, if your big communicator is the catcher, it's like, no harm in that. But at the same time, they can't really, they're not going to make
they're very far away.
They're very far away from the outfield. So, are they going to make them feel at ease? So, like, just that communication aspect. Now, you could have someone that's a fantastic communicator and they might not be very good at rounders. Maybe that's not the answer. But, like, it's just about finding that middle ground. But that would be my biggest advice, for a team that's mixing together. And, to try and play together. So, like, sometimes at our training sessions, we'll, if we've got, the men's team and the ladies team, at the end, we might break out into, we'll just do a full mixed game. And, you're trying to even up the teams as much as possible. But then sometimes, you do need to say, okay, well, this is the team that played together last week. Maybe we need to kind of get them to play as a team in training. And sometimes you just need to look at that. But again, it's about improving that communication and kind of team spirit side of it.
Yeah, and I think, like, we talk about the mix being this, like, really unique part of Rounders, and, playing together, like the men and the women playing together. And I think it's a great, like, I don't know, it's just a great part of our game. And from the ladies' perspective, like, we're blessed with having an incredible ladies team, and some of our ladies would, fit on any man's team in the country. You might disagree, but when it comes to the mix, like, what I love about our club is there is no fear of playing with the ladies. There's no kind of feeling like this is like a lesser part of our team. And I think, like, we see that in all the mixed games that we play. I always find, I know we disagree on this, I always find that the mixed team with the stronger ladies tend to be the stronger team. And it's always that, not that the men are all much of a muchness, it's just that the really strong ladies can really, like, drive a mixed team. And, exceptions to that as well. But I think to not be afraid to play together and to not be afraid of, like, saying to the ladies to move or to saying to the men to, like, throw it in a bit softer, or, be used to playing together and kind of communicating together. I think it's a great part of our game, and it's one that we should start talking about more, Darryl. We should start promoting some more.
Yeah, no, and I know you're saying you think it's the team with the stronger ladies, whereas really I think probably the best mixed teams are the ones that are more adaptable, because it's so changing. You're possibly playing people out of position, and sometimes, and it's just from my own experience of having to tweak teams, and we tend to have to do it more in the mixed. Maybe that's a hint that we're lining out our teams wrong from the start as opposed to anything else. But it's everyone been on that same page and said, look, we're going to change things around, and people kind of knowing, okay, well, it's not because I'm a man, it's not because I'm a lady. It's like we are a team, and it's the team that's able to adapt. Maybe in the field, you want to swap a position, or it's the team that's able to adapt to, mentioned earlier, maybe there's one weaker player. Not saying they're weak, but weaker. So it's the team that can adapt and find that player maybe, or that pocket of space. If you can find that in the first inning, as opposed to, maybe not finding it out until near the end of the game, and then you come off and, God, if we had known that player out there was, maybe their throw was a bit off today, we didn't test them enough. Or, if you don't find that out towards the end of the game, you can't capitalize on it. So that's why I think just the adaptability is more on the mix side.
Yeah, and like, everyone has off days, and I think probably in the mix is probably more use of subs than in any other, in the ladies or the men's, because like that, it can just depend. It can depend on, like, we're playing Glenbarntown, who are experts at placing a ball, and they're going to hammer me right outfield. So then, like, we need to make a change there. I think, like, it's very acceptable in the mixed game for this constant turnover of players and moving things around. And yeah, it depends on who you're playing on any given day, and having a big squad for the mixed is so important, because like that, two players might work extremely well together. And I mentioned that about second base and in shortstop, or third base and shortstop. and they might just have, like I find it in the ladies, Maura on her third base and Anne-Marie on her shortstop, just have this really good relationship in where they're positioning. So it means that they can both play excellently because they play there together and they understand when one's moving out, one moves in. You know, so again, that might come down to maybe it not being your best player, but the best player for that position with that partner in field.
Absolutely. Yeah, because that, you know, then maybe, you know, say like somebody else comes in to manage your team and they don't know that. And they're like, okay, well, I want to play this player here. And you break up that. So not only, you know, you're missing this player, but the player that works really well beside them, they might only look a shadow of the player that they do beside another player.
Yeah, and I think that's what's really important then about the mix is that you figure out what those little dynamics are, particularly for outfield actually, because you know you do have to cover so much ground and you do have to rely on each other, like left outfield and centre outfield, to kind of cover that space. So it's just about getting that little relationship going and that little relationship right, and it can be hard then to split that up. So if you have like a brilliant duo in the men's that cover that, it's hard to split that up into a mixed game. And vice versa for the ladies. So it's just about finding the best people, all of those, you know, the speed, batting, personality, and fielding, and like kind of getting the best combination that works as like your entire team unit.
Yeah, so basically, you know, everyone listening to this, if you can find 9 perfect players who are, you know, fantastic fielders, brilliant batters, never get out, great communicators, they're probably the 9 that you should pick for your team.
They'll probably play for Adamstown, so.
But guys, you know, Marie, thanks a million for coming on, and I hope the guys watching this, you know, can take 1 or 2 things from this. So, you know, there are probably a lot of questions that you're asking yourselves, and we're just after kind of having it out a little bit, you know, going through the pros and cons to it. But thanks very much.
Thanks, Darrell.